Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Biblical Reflections. We're focusing on finding yourself in the stories of the book of Genesis. And we're in the very first story of the book of Genesis, the story of creation. It's noteworthy that the book of Genesis will spend 35 verses on the creation of the world. We hear so much about in the beginning, God created, the very first verse. So someone would translate in the beginning of God's creation, or some would translate God created the beginning, various different ways of looking at the opening verse. But from that beginning, dealing with the creation of heaven and earth, the Torah will spend approximately 36 verses on the entire story of the 6 days of creation. From the next verse on, we're talking about man, the creation of the human being, one of many, many creations God made in the 6 days of creation. And man is rather small in comparison to some of the vastness and greatness of the other creations that God creates in the 6 days of creation. Think about space, think about the sun, the moon, the stars, the galaxies, one little human being. And yet, from the moment that that one little human being is created, the Torah will talk about this one creation for how many verses? For the rest of the entire Torah. So literally, for 5 books of the Torah, with the exception of the first 35 verses, the Torah is talking about man. Yes, the Torah wants us to know that God created the world. And the Torah wants us to know the order in which he created it. But more than teaching us how we got here, the Torah is interested in what we are here for. In this course, we're not going to delve into the 6 days of creation, those 35 verses, because that would take us at least a year or two just to go over the understanding of those first 36 verses, 35 verses. There are many wonderful books. If you're interested, you're fascinating on creation and evolution and how it works together. You could read books by Dr. Gerald Schroeder, books by Friedman, books by Moose. There's a lot of books out there that can help you through it. But what we're going to focus on are the verses that have to do with the creation of man, because we're about the stories of the Bible, and the stories of the Bible take place with man. So we're going to take a look at our first text for this evening. It's text number 3. Thank you, Hannah, for putting it up there. Right on cue. You're doing wonderful as our co-host. Text 3, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over the animals, the whole earth, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." That's text number 3 from the Torah. Any problems with this verse? Obviously, the most famous of all the difficulties is this opening word, "Let us make man." Who is the us? Who was God talking to when he says, "Let us make man in our image"? Who is partnering with God here to create man? And this verse has been used by those who want to claim a duality to God, a pluralism of God, a partner to God. But the difficulty in this is that all the remaining verses speak only singularly, and he created. So obviously, God is sending us a message in this word, "Let us create man." There are various answers, many answers. Every commentary will give you an answer. Some say every aspect of creation up until this point contributed to the characteristics of man, being that man would need to interact with all of creation. So God takes a little bit of every creation that he made up until this point in the first 6 days, and he uses some of everything that he made to create this final creation, the creation of man. So let us make man. He's talking to all of creation. Another interpretation of "let us make man" is for the benefit of man, not just for God's own enjoyment, but the creation of man is for our benefit as well. Another interpretation, a more of a Hasidic interpretation, means that it's let us, all of God's attributes were used in the creation of man. Another interpretation, that man will be able to continue the process of creating man through procreation. That this creating process will also involve us meaning the human being, that we will continue the act of creation of man. You see, the Torah is telling us that there is a duality when it comes to the creation of man. There is a divine component and there's an earthly component in the creation of man. There's going to be two aspects that will come together. You take a look at the verses in the book of Genesis that records not man, but the creation of animal life. Let's take a look at text number 4. This is before the creation of man and God's creating animal. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures, each according to its kind, animal and creeping things, and beast of the land, each according to its kind." And it was so. So we have a very simple verse that talks about the creation of animal life. It's still part of chapter 1. God creates animals by instructing the earth to produce them. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. So first he creates the earth, and then he instructs earth. I'm asking you now, earth, to give forth from you living creatures. So animals come from earth. In one step, God fuses the body and the living force of the animal, and it came to be. There is no duality mentioned in that verse. God asks earth to create the animal, and the animal comes forth. I point this out to you because now we're going to look at the creation of man. Chapter 2, verse 7, text number 5 on the screen. And Hashem God formed the man of dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. If you pick up the slight difference in how God creates animal and how God creates man, there is a vast difference. It may be simple of a word or two, but a word of the two in Torah really could mean a complete different type of creation. By animal, God says to the earth, give forth this animal, and an animal comes forth. The animal has within it the body and the life force of the animal. But when it came to the human being, God goes ahead and he forms. God forms. He doesn't instruct the earth to give forth. God forms the man from the dust of the ground. We come from the earth, but all we were at that point was a dummy, a golem-like creation, no movement. In order for this object now made out of earth, this dummy, this Frankenstein, if you want, not to put us down in any type of way, but in order for it to become a life force, in order for it to be living, needs a second part of the process. For now, it's a lifeless body. That's all that was formed. How do we get the lifeless body into us as a human being? The verse continued, and the verse said, he blew into our nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. You see, by animal, God creates through the power of speech. God spoke, and it came to be. He said, let it come forth, and it was. By man, it says, Vayipach bi'apav, God blew into him. A difference between speech and blowing. When I speak, words are just coming out of my mouth. But when I blow from my innards, that's coming from within me. Speech is external, blowing is more internal. And so the creation of the human being, the creation of man, the soul of Adam, first man, the soul of man comes from a uniquely deep aspect of God's inner being. Yet his body was created from the lowest elements of creation, the dust on earth, the crudest stuff on earth. Note, the body of the animal was not as lowly as the body of man, because the body of animal was created complete with its life force. Its stuff, if you want to call it that, was of material that lends itself already to spiritual life forces as it is. It didn't need a duality. It didn't need two elements coming together. What the earth gave forth was an animal, a living, walking animal. I was going to say walking, talking, but the animal wasn't talking. Only Mr. Ed was talking. The rest of the animals were not able to talk, and the serpent, as we will find out either later this evening or next Monday night. But the human being, we are taught was just dummy material. That's all earth put forth. No life force, no energy, no spirit, lifeless, an inanimate object. And God takes this lifeless being and breathes into it from the highest aspect of himself, a soul that will give this lifeless body spirit, a spirit of life. A fusion is taking place, a fusion of low earthly material and lofty godly spirit. This is why the human being is such a wonder. This is why the human being, I know you can talk about the galaxies being so complex and the sun and the moon and the stars and the Milky Way and everything, but the most complex of all of God's creations, the most fascinating of all creations, the most unique of all creations is this human being, this synthesis of two opposites that seemingly have nothing in common, and yet they operate as one entity. And that's why, by the way, we're called Adam. It wasn't just the first human being called Adam. We're called Adam, man. We're called Adam from two reasons. Adama le'elyon, because we're compared to the one on high, because we're created in the image of God. And Adam from Adama, from earth. The human being is made up of two parts, earth and Adama le'elyon, the soul that comes from above. This is the duality. This is the partnership we speak about when we say, let us make man. It's a combination of heaven and earth. Both aspects are needed for the creation of man. The heavenly world, God, the God life force, and earth, that which God had already created in the first part of the 6 days of creation. So why are we created with this duality? The human being was meant to elevate the entire structure of the cosmos of creation, physical and spiritual, the angelic world as well, the heavenly world as well, the Sephirot for those that study a little bit of Kabbalah and Zohar and Hasidus, the physical world and all that is within this physical world. The human being needs to elevate all aspects of creation. And the human being is linked to every level in creation. Creation, if you want to put it in this way, is at the mercy of our behavior. The success or failure of the world rests on us, on our free choice. And free choice is a subject we're going to expand upon as we get into lesson 3 and lesson 4. We're going to keep hammering away at understanding what is this free choice that we have. How is it possible to have free choice? We'll leave that. We'll get to it. Trust me. The way we act on earth determines the entire structure of creation. If it'll be elevated or it will be brought down. You know, it says the angels rely on us. The angels trembled when the human being was created. Why? Because they realized that this creature has so much power over all of existence. Now, in order for us to have an effect on all of creation, we need to have within us a connection, a link to the lowest and a link to the highest. Our link to the lowest is what came from the earth. Our link to the highest is that soul that God breathed into our nostrils. Think of it this way. When you need to lift a pile of bricks, the only way to lift the entire pile of bricks is you need to get underneath the lowest brick in order to lift all of them. We too have to be connected to the lowest level of creation if we indeed must raise up all of creation. If we just start from the middle of the pile of bricks, we may be able to lift it, but the bricks underneath will not be affected at all. The human being has a responsibility to elevate all aspects of creation, and thus we need to be connected to every aspect of creation, from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. And when we lift it up from the bottom being the body, the physical body of man made from earth, all of creation above this level is also being elevated. Only a human being gifted and blessed with the loftiest dimension, this divine soul breathed into us by God, will have the strength and the ability to reach below and raise up an entire world of creation through elevating the very lowly body of man. This duality, which, by the way, does not exist in any other creation, this duality, these two states of consciousness, were not meant to operate at odds with one another, but rather to operate as a harmonious whole, to work together as a team. The body was meant to serve as a container, as an instrument of the soul, allowing the soul to transmit its divine light into the physical realm. The soul without a body can't affect the physical world, because remember, you got to get underneath it. You have to be part of it to affect it. So if all we are souls without body, we're a bunch of angels. We're spiritual energy, spiritual light, but we can't affect the lowly world of creation. The only way we can affect the world of creation is if we're part of the creation. If we're part of the creation, that's the physical body that comes from the earth. It's not of the physical world, the soul. The soul is of the spiritual world. The body is of the physical world. When it's merged together, body and soul, we can affect and elevate the divine energy in the entire world. I'll give you a simple analogy and we'll move on. The analogy of a light bulb. Think about it. The relationship between the light bulb and the light contained within the bulb. See, the bulb is meant to be transparent. It allows the light to come on through and brightens your room. The glass is not meant to obscure the light, but to create the appropriate conditions so that electric light can be produced. The body is meant to serve as this unobtrusive physical shell for the soul, to allow the light of the soul to shine into the world. Without the body, the light can't accomplish, the soul can't accomplish. But without the soul, the body is just earth. Now, let's suppose in our analogy of the bulb, we paint the color of the glass a dark color. What happens to the light? It lessens the radiance. It blocks the glow. If our body is going to be a dark color, meaning it will not be following the ways that God wants it to follow, it will diminish the light of the soul that's meant to shine in the world. You see, all of these verses that talk about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and the fusion of the body and soul and God breathing a soul into the body of Adam, the Torah is really talking to us. The Adam in the Bible is me. The Adam in the Bible is you. It's each of us. It's telling us of who we are, what we are. Because at times we're confused by this duality. Am I a body? Am I a soul? Am I physical? Am I spiritual? The answer is both. We are a duality that functions as one. Why? We'll get to soon. First, we're establishing from the text of the book of creation, the book of Genesis, how we are. We are body and soul. And then we'll get to the why. Life works best when we, the body and soul, function as a team. When the body allows the soul to use it, to use the body to function in a godly manner, in a soul-like manner, while still in the physical world. Simply put, when the body lets the light shine, when the body is like the light bulb, allowing the light to shine forth from it. Don't separate from your body. We don't dismiss the body. The body isn't unholy. We need this body to accomplish. You need these hands. You need your legs. You need your mouth. You need your eyes. Together, working together, we have the ability to fulfill our purpose, to be what we're meant to be. And when we do, that's when we find true peace and harmony and joy. So let's get back to Genesis. All sounds great, right? Body, soul comes together, duality, harmony, light bulbs spread the light. So what happened? Why didn't it go as the plan? What happened? What went wrong? How could this not have worked perfectly? How could man been able to deviate from God's will? Simply put, how did sin come about? If God made this and God put the soul in a body that God formed, remember, he didn't say to the earth, give forth the body. He formed the body. He took the earth that he made, he formed it, he molds it, he designs it, he mapped it all out. He decided on 2 eyes and 1 nose and 1 mouth and how many teeth and how many ears. He made this all up, 10 fingers, right? All designed by God. Every function of this body designed by God, with purpose, with reason, with thoughtfulness. And then he puts this soul into it, a soul that comes from his breath into our nostrils. He puts his soul into a body and he says, function together and you'll elevate the whole world. All sounds good. Pick up the bricks, right? How did this sin happen? How is it that we're able to sin? How is it that we're able to not follow God's will? How is it, we're going to use the first story, even though every story in the Bible, as I have been saying from when we started last week with this class and this week, every story is a story about us. Yes, we're using characters of Adam and Eve, but it's a story about us. How did we sin? How did we take a fruit from a tree that God said not to eat and eat it? Sin is not an accident. And I have to be very careful because it doesn't mean that it's not a sin when I say it's not an accident. It is a sin, but it's not an accident. Because it too, we must say this, the ability to sin, the desire to sin, must be part of the creation of man as well. It has to be part of it, or it would not exist. So our question really is, where did it come from? Did it come from the soul of God? Did it come from the earth that God created? If you want to blame it on the earth, how is it possible that the earth that God just made a day earlier, 2 days earlier, right? That earth that God forms this body from is able to create a human being that will have the free choice to be able to sin against its designer. The guy that's making the computer, the designer of the computer, programs the computer. I know today we talk about artificial intelligence, and perhaps we can use some of the analogies of artificial intelligence as we get into this understanding of how is it possible for this human being that God creates, that God forms, that we do not believe came from accidents and from evolution of apes, but clearly designed by God to be this different, unique creation. How is it able to sin? If the soul comes directly from God, then the soul would not have the ability to sin. So obviously we're going to blame the body. How is it possible if the body is a creation of God as well? So from the moment the body was created, it had within it the potential to develop a sense of its own self-importance. Call it a feeling of independence. Or better yet, call it there being an I. That I exist. The moment I say I exist, there is the sense of I exist outside of God. I'm not rebelling against God in my statement. I'm simply saying there is an I. There is an independent existence. There is a God and his will, and there is me, separate from God, loyal to God, but separate. I exist. That's part of the body. the body has this potential within it to think of itself as something of an existence of its own. Our thought process, our mind tells us that I exist. 2 points. I use the word potential. The body was not forced to feel this way. There was, however, in the design of the body, in the DNA of the body, the possibility that if something was triggered, it could feel and think this way. I'm going to use this terminology. Think of it as a recessive, corrupted gene. There are genes that we have within our body that have the potential for diseases that are passed on from one generation to the other. You've done nothing to earn them, so to say. They're just there in your body, and it's been passed on from one generation to the next. Now, it doesn't mean because you carry this gene that you will get the disease. It means that you're susceptible to it. It means that under certain conditions, those genes could flourish, so to say, and cause some difficult physical problems in our life, some health challenges in our life. So you need to be more on guard. You know, they always ask you, did anyone in your family ever have? And you fill out those forms, right? It doesn't mean that you have it because your father had it or your grandfather had it, but it means be careful. So if generations before you had diabetes, and you're going to say your mother had it and your grandmother had it or grandfather, whichever side may have had it, they're going to tell you, be careful, you know, diabetes is in the family. That means there's the potential that it's part of the genes within you, and you need to be a little more aware of it. You know, the more research they do now on DNA, the more of these genes that they will discover that we're carrying. I don't know, it's worthy of a great debate, you don't need me to lead this debate, but anyone can have this debate. If it's better for us to know or not know. As they say in Yiddish, there are times besser nicht wissen. It's better sometimes not to know. Do we really want to know if we're carriers of this gene or that gene or that gene? That which we can do something about by better protection, by better health, by taking care of ourselves, obviously there's a reason we should know. But if there's nothing we can do about it, do we really want to go through our lives with that anxiety that we could possibly be a carrier of this and that? Let's get back to Adam. Within the body of Adam, there was already this hidden gene that, if triggered, would allow the body to feel itself, to feel independence, to feel I exist. Point number 2. At this stage, and the stage of what I just described to you about feeling of independence, I mentioned nothing about sin or evil yet. I'm simply talking about bringing about a sense of separation, meaning that suddenly I feel that body and soul are separate entities, that they're not on the same team. Perhaps they're being forced to be on the same team, but we're not really alike. And we'll develop this thought as we go along, as it goes from a sense of independence to an actual sin thought. We still have a way to go. So now that I said that we had this, that it came from the body, and within the body was this recessive gene that had the ability to feel independence under certain conditions, the next question we'll ask, where did that come from? Where did that gene, recessive corrupted gene, as I call it, where did that come from? So everything that I'm describing here to you really comes from the teachings of Hasidus, a more of a Kabbalistic understanding of the words of creation. And I'm really just summarizing. And if you take the courses going Kabbalistic, some of the courses that Rabbi Levine gives, he gets into far more in depth of the concepts that I'm saying. But my focus in this course is of the stories. And I have to give you some of this Hasidic background in order to have you understand how this first story about a sin, how it's possible even to take place. So I'm summarizing for you. So I want to go back to the text text of the Bible is always perfection. Even when it doesn't look perfect, its imperfection is its perfection. So I want you to gain an appreciation now for every single word, that nothing is by mistake, nothing is an error by the editor. We're going to look at text number 6 that Hannah will put on. It's again from the book of Genesis. And I want you to pay close attention to it. And God said, "Let the earth put forth grass, herb yielding seed, and fruit tree bearing fruit after its kind, wherein is the seed thereof upon the earth." So this is God creating vegetation. He's creating the trees. He's creating the grass. He's creating the bushes. And he asks that in this creation, he says, "I'd like there to be something called a fruit tree. And on this fruit tree, there will be something called a fruit. And in this fruit, there will be something called a seed. And this seed, as you're going to eventually put it back into the earth, will continue this process of creation again and again and again, all the way so that in the year 2020, if you're going to want an orange, you'll still have an orange. You're going to want a tangerine, you'll still have a tangerine. Why? Because the very first fruit tree had on it a fruit that had within it a seed, and in that little seed is the entire tree all over again. An amazing, miraculous creation. The more you think about it, the more you delve into it, how one little seed has within it the potential of thousands and thousands of years of trees that still come forth, and we still eat from that original tree, so to say, today when we eat a fruit, because it all comes back to that original creation, to text number 6. So far, so good, right? So let's see what happens. God instructs the earth to do this. And the earth brought forth grass. See over here, he asks for grass, gives it grass. Herb yielding seed after its kind, herb yielding seed, so far so good. And tree bearing fruit, wherein is the seed thereof after its kind. What did God ask for? He asked for a fruit tree bearing fruit. What came out? A tree came out that had fruit. Now, you may just pass this through. You're reading it time and time again and not realize something didn't go exactly right. God asked for a fruit tree bearing fruit, and what he got was a tree bearing fruit. What does this all mean? What you find here is this discrepancy of the command and the result. The command was for a fruit tree bearing fruit. That would have meant, literally, that the tree itself was edible, that you can bite into the branch, that you bite into what we would call the wood, the bark, the tree itself, the branches of the tree. You would bite into the wood, and the wood would taste like the fruit of that tree. The tree itself was to be a fruit. And that tree would also have within it smaller fruits that you take home, you buy by the pound in Rouse and Vaughn's. You look for the sales of who's having the better sales on the apples and the oranges that week. And then you take the seeds and you keep the process going. But the tree itself, according to the instruction that God gave it, was to also be a fruit. But the earth didn't do it that way. The earth gave forth a tree. The tree itself was not edible. The edible part was the fruit that was on the tree. Was this a rebellion of the earth? Maybe, but not really. Because the verse is telling us that the earth had within it this ability, it was created this way, to act independently of its mandate. Which means that when God created the earth, he created the earth with this ability to follow, but not exactly. It gave forth a tree that had a dichotomy between its bark and its fruit. The earth gave forth a tree that separated its body and soul, that the tree would not be exactly like its fruit. Text number 7, simple verse. We have a verse in the Torah that says, man is a tree of the field, that we are in comparison to a tree in the field. And quite often the Torah makes these examples of us being similar to a tree. How are we like a tree? The bark and the trunk are secondary to the fruit. The soul is like the fruit, the body is like the tree. When the earth gave forth trees with non-edible bark, it brought forth an aspect of the trunk that was not in perfect harmony with the fruit. It wasn't the same. The bark and the fruit were different. Yes, they worked together, but there was this slight break in the unity of the two. So when God forms man, what does he form us from? From the earth. The earth that has that recessive gene already in it. This flaw that was in the earth now becomes part of man, part of our body. So pre-planted in us in that body that God forms from the earth that already showed that it has this sense of independence, that it doesn't necessarily follow exactly the command. It does good, but not exactly. That gene is in our body. And it allows us to utilize that gift of free choice that I promise you we will talk about at great length, to separate our body from our soul, for the body to think of itself, for the body to think for itself, and to make choices that are more self-serving, that are more body-serving, that make me feel good. There were two options in front of man at the moment of creation. Option number 1, perfection. And if we chose option number 1, door number 1, a little let's make a deal lingo here, the gene that I spoke about remains only in a recessive state. It never gets developed because we just follow perfection. We follow the choice that God said, this is what I want you to do. We never even know that that gene exists. Or there's door number 2. There's option B. Option B is what we're going to spend a great deal of time as we go along. Because in option B, there is a spark that kicks in and allows this rebellious part of our body to cause the rift between body and soul. You see this alluded to in the description in the Bible, in the creation of man. We're going to take a look now at text number 8. Text number 8 comes from the description of the creation of man. And God created, Vayivra, the human in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and he gives them the instruction, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, the bird of the sky, and every living thing that moves on earth. Let's look at text number 9. And God, Elokim, formed the man of dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. So there's a general description of the creation of man, the ideal state, go out there and rule the world, elevate the world. Man would rule the world not by force, but simply because we have this divine spirit, and the divine spirit was so apparent to all of creation that animals would be able to recognize the godliness in man and serve man. And then the verse would go right into Shabbat, and the first Shabbat would come. But that state did not last very long. That state of perfection did not last very long. As we shall see, we never got to that first Shabbat so easily. It didn't happen as what we would call in Hollywood, take 1. We right away went for take 2. It didn't happen so easily. And so in chapter 2 of Genesis, we get a more detailed description of man's creation. And let's take a look again at text. Let's look at text number 9. And God Elokim, this is chapter 2. Text 8 is chapter 1. People always ask, why is there 2 descriptions of man? This is the way it could have been if we stayed in perfection. Take number 1. Text number 9 is the way it actually happens. And God Elokim formed the man from the dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. We start focusing on the duality. We start focusing on body and soul, not as one harmony, but as 2 separate creations, a 2-step process, body and soul. Now we're going to read through text number 10. I'm going to move through some of Genesis until we get to that moment of sin. And right when we get to that moment of sin is when I'm going to leave you hanging for a whole week right by that tree. And you'll have a week to think about if you're going to eat it or not. Text number 10. God Elokim planted a garden in Eden to the east and placed there the man whom he had formed. Takes this first prize creation, remember, most unique of all creations, and he puts him in a place called the Garden of Eden. And God Elokim caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. Also, the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river issues forth from Eden to water the garden, and from there it is divided and becomes 4 headwaters. The name of the first is Pishon, and it is the one that encircles the whole land of Havilah, where the gold is. So you guys want to find where Havilah is, because that's where the gold is. The name of the second river is Gihon, the one that encircles the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river it's the Tigris River, the one that flows towards the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. So these are rivers that are literally talked about in the opening verses of creation. They all they come from the source of the Garden of Eden. Hashem Elokim took man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. And Hashem Elokim commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may eat, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you must not eat thereof, for on the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. That's the instruction that first man is given. So you've all heard the words, the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. We refer to heaven when we talk about where we go after 120 years on this earth. We talk about going to the Garden of Eden. There we're referring to it in a spiritual, heavenly-like place. But in the book of Genesis, this garden was a physical place. It's giving us a geography where it is. It's what we would call today modern-day Iraq, is what's being described by where these 4 rivers are located. Interesting, of all places, that first Garden of Eden is in a very troubled spot of the world today. The verse clearly points us in the direction that this was a physical place. Remember, there was gold there was rivers there were fruit trees there were plants there. It was a heaven on earth. It was pleasing to the sight. Everything that grew there was good to eat. And your instruction was to work it, to guard it, all physical, but it wasn't an ordinary garden. It was the Garden of Eden. It had within it spiritual energy. It was the perfection on earth. It was paradise. It was a state of revealed godliness. It had a manifested sense of divine presence. And Adam and Eve lived in this garden in what we would call Mesopotamia, a garden where heaven and earth were combined, where they lived with their body and soul now functioning as one. Now, the garden didn't require pruning and tending to. It was automatic. Adam and Eve needed to attend to the spiritual needs, so to say, of the trees and gardens. Just be the master. Everything would happen for them on autopilot. The physical work was not required at this point. That came post-sin. It wasn't independent. It received its needs directly from God. I'll just read to you quickly from Nachmanides on the book of Genesis. He says, these trees did not need anyone to tend and to prune them, This is the meaning of the expression, and Hashem Elokim planted. They were his plantings, the work of his hands, existing forever. So that's the original Garden of Eden. This was so long as man's body and soul were totally one. But the moment that first sin will take place, the moment man recognizes his body, that his body has wants, that his body is something independent, that his body has its own needs, that his body has its own desires, the garden will also be affected by this. And the physical and the spiritual will now separate. The spiritual Garden of Eden will be a heavenly place where we'll go after our existence on this earth. And the earth could no longer have this type of spiritual Garden of Eden in a physical-like setting. So how does man sin? How do we sin? What's the story with this serpent? Well, who is this serpent? Why is the serpent so interested in getting man to sin? And why does the serpent pick on Eve? Why not on Adam? The serpent will convince Eve to eat, and then Eve will convince Adam to eat. And why does God not want them to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Knowledge sounds like something good. Knowledge doesn't sound bad. What does it mean, knowledge of good and evil? That's all for next week. For now, let's leave it with this godly instruction. 2 trees, tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can eat from all the trees of the garden, including the tree of life. 1 tree, see that 1 tree? Can't eat from it. Can't eat from it. And it's that tree that we'll be mostly concerned about. As I said, it doesn't say it was an evil tree. Calling it tree of knowledge doesn't mean that it's evil. That its knowledge of good and evil doesn't mean in itself is evil. This fruit from this tree would bring about a knowledge of things that man didn't need to know about. Until this point, there was no knowledge of the very meaning of evil, because we were one. One with our soul, one with God. There was no concept of anything outside this oneness. The potential for evil existed. It was in that pre-planned flaw inherent in earth that we spoke about earlier. Created by God in knowledge form, meaning God created the knowledge of evil. He placed it in this potential state, in this fruit tree. He put it before man, and he says to man, it's better if you don't eat from that tree. Because you eat from that tree, bad things are going to happen. Why did God allow for this flaw? If the earth, remember I said the earth rebelled, the earth can only rebel if God allowed it, because God created that original flaw. When God created the body of man, he created it knowingly full well that we would have that recessive gene within us. When God created the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he created it knowing that there's a free choice for man to go ahead and actually eat from it. When God told us not to eat from it, he knew good and well that there's a possibility that we would eat from it. And finally, the ultimate question that I have asked so many times, which I find to be the greatest mystery of the book of Genesis, of all of the creations of God. How is it possible when the serpent convinces Eve to eat from that tree, that Eve was able to stretch forth her hand and take that fruit and bring it to her mouth? Why didn't the machine shut down? The machine, meaning the body created by God just a few hours earlier. Why did that machine listen? Why did the body listen? How is it possible for it to listen? Did God plan for it? Did God want it? What is sin? What does it mean to sin? And of course, the subject of free choice. Lots to come in your way. We'll see you all next Monday night. If you'd like to join me Wednesday afternoons at 12:30, we discuss the chosen people, part of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses' final speech to the Jewish people. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Take care.